Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning and welcome. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. We're going to give people just about another minute or two before we get started. Great. Terrific. Good morning. Good morning. People are still dialing in. Terrific. Let's see. Maybe 30 more seconds, and then we're going to get started. Okay, let's get started. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our conversation on emergency and disaster response and relief in our region. I am Nicole Taylor. I'm the president and CEO of the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, and I'm honored to be here today to open this important gathering of our donors and funders. I'm certain that you all are here today because you have felt, as we have, the heaviness of the challenges our region has experienced in recent months. I don't know about you, but every time I see rain starting, I get a little nervous and anxious about what's to come and what's facing our communities. In addition, we just experienced the tragic mass shooting in Half Moon Bay, and that left us all feeling shocked and devastated. I had the honor of spending time with folks out on the coast on Friday with my colleague Manuel, who's going to be moderating this panel, and can't even explain the emotions that are still very raw in the communities there. It is clearly pretty devastating. And that was on top of the storms and the freezing weather that continue to batter our communities across our two counties and across the entire Bay Area. And in January, we launched an emergency and disaster relief fund to help those affected by these disasters. And we'd been planning on opening this type of fund for a while, and especially watching the back-to-back emergencies and crises in the last couple of years. And we know that is clear that future emergencies and disasters are inevitable, unfortunately. And so we structured this fund to be evergreen, to be permanent, and to be open year-round so that we can be flexible no matter what crises happens. And that means we're going to continue to raise money for this fund so that we can respond to our communities immediately when an emergency strikes, as well as assisting in building community resilience and helping communities long after the disaster has occurred. So to date, we have raised $740,000, and that's just in 2 months worth of work, but the needs far exceed what we've raised. As of the end of last week, we received funding requests of close to $2 million from local nonprofits that are helping communities through these recent disasters. So today we have speakers representing the greater nonprofit sector in our region, and they are going to share their experiences, insights, and recommendations on recent emergency response and relief efforts, as well as ideas on how, as a region, we can collectively prepare and better respond to future emergencies and disasters. I know that today's discussion will be both informative and inspiring, and that we all will come away with a greater understanding, not just of the challenges we face, but the resources and capabilities that we can draw upon to meet those challenges. So once again, welcome to our event. Thank you for being here as we work together to build a more equitable and resilient community for all. And with that, I'm going to pass the mic to my colleague, Manuel Santamaria. He's the Vice President of Community Action here at the Community Foundation, and he will be moderating the discussion. Manny, please take it away.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for that great introduction. And I have the privilege of working with the speakers that I'm going to present in just a few seconds. Anna, Adam, and Marsha. They've been invaluable in supporting the efforts that we've been thinking about, working on, and delivering on. But I also wanted just to say a big thank you very quickly to our IT department, Woobsy and Ann, who have also been leading, the work across the different departments for response, during these times. And as Nicole said, the series of storms that have come through the Bay Area have been immense. They're forecasting more rain, which is going to add to the snowpack, but it's going to add to the waterlogged region that we call home. And the estimate and the cost to repair the damage from these storms could exceed $1 billion. That's a huge number. This is for California, but we want to talk about San Mateo and Santa Clara County. We want to make sure that we can support the communities that are most impacted, the most vulnerable. And as Nicole said, we spent some time on the coast, just making sure that we began to talk about the needs for the ongoing support of these communities. So today with me, like I said, I have Adam Ely, who is the Deputy County Executive for the County of San Mateo. In his role, he leads different departments focusing around criminal justice and emergency response. But I think the most critical function, I believe, is he's the director of the emergency operations centers in San Mateo County. So his response and his responsibilities were critical during the winter storms. Also with us today is Marsha Hovey with CADRE, which is an acronym that stands for Collaborating Agencies Disaster Relief Effort in Santa Clara County. And CADRE is a part of a national network of organizations that connect and assist nonprofits, faith-based organizations, and different sectors of the private community to come together and think about the response during local disaster. And finally, we have Anna Miscolta, who is the Director of Community Resilience at Thrive Alliance. And Thrive Alliance is a network, again, of nonprofits in San Mateo County. And they've just created a brand new, what's called a COAD, C-O-A-D, which stands for Community Organizations Active in Disaster. And all three folks have many, many years of not only responsibility, but also, thinking about creating plans to respond to disaster. And so I welcome you and thank you for spending the time with us today. Welcome, Adam, Marsha, and Anna. So let me start out by just asking a quick question so that we can begin to warm up the audience. Adam, let me start with you. Can you just give us a quick overview of the impact in our region in the aftermath of the recent storms in the last week in December and, the last 6 weeks still, because it continues to rain in January and February?
Yeah, absolutely. And just thank you for organizing this, and thank you for everybody who's on the call for taking the time out to think about these issues and to think about partnering and supporting emergency preparedness. The storms, that began New Year's Eve and continued on for several weeks, and then continued to be sort of punching the county repeatedly, with windstorms and whatnot, and additional atmospheric rivers, had sort of a widespread impact. Folks are probably familiar with it. They either lived it or, have looked at it. But we had significant impact to public and private infrastructure. We had very significant impacts to some of our most vulnerable populations, which seems to always be the case. The folks that may not be able to weather the storm are the ones who actually get hit the hardest. And so within the county, we had, upwards of probably $40 to $50 million in damage. And that included, specific impacts to individuals. We had mass sort of evacuation, swift water rescue at Trailer Park in the unincorporated San Mateo area in Belmont. We had similar evacuations at other trailer parks. We had water inundation along the coast side at various locations. And we certainly had along the coast side and elsewhere extended power outages and connectivity outages that really impacted folks and their ability to work, their ability to feel safe, their ability to get warm, very basic needs, their ability to obtain food. So what we in the county did was, we did our best to respond in a way that reached as many people as quickly as possible in partnership with Thrive. Anna was right there in our emergency operations center, connecting with the various nonprofits and organizations that can reach people that we can't reach, that people who may have great trust in the nonprofits, but may be wary of connecting with government. And so we're very thankful for that. And we're very thankful that the Silicon Valley Community Foundation it has the foresight of putting together an emergency and disaster relief fund that the idea is that it's evergreen, because what we're seeing, and certainly what it feels like, is that we're going to continue to have these events more regularly. And so the county's efforts are going to be to prepare for those events and to try to organize and collaborate with as many people as possible so that when they hit us and all of our most vulnerable populations, we're in a good position to respond.
Thanks, Adam. And you made a good point, sort of like the issue with communities that are most vulnerable and sometimes don't feel comfortable with government, right? And sort of talking to government. And so Anna and Marsha, from your perspective, just give us a little bit of an overview in terms of how the network of nonprofits, both in San Mateo, Anna, which is the one that you work in, and Marsha in Santa Clara County, how you guys came together, how you actually thought about maybe even coordinating from just the 10,000 view from each of your perspectives. Anna, let's start with you.
Sure. Yeah, the communication issue is something that is really important to us. And as Adam mentioned, there's definitely a lot of, I would say, a disconnect between some of the most at-risk communities and then what the county can push out there through the newsroom. So we kind of tried to fill that gap through our network of nonprofits. We work very closely with community-based organizations. So a lot of them use community ambassador models where people from the community, you may have heard the term promotora before. It's a common type of community ambassador across the Bay Area, well, actually globally, but using people who already know their neighbors and already know kind of what is a good way to frame this information for people. Working directly with them is extremely important to getting the not only emergency messaging out, but also recovery messages. So in the past couple of weeks, we've been working to distribute information that kind of takes that technical level information that FEMA might be putting out, or potentially the county, and bringing it down to a more accessible level. What is the simple way to say this? And then let's translate this into 5 languages as fast as we can and get them out to our network. So we did that when the Disaster Recovery Center opened up several weeks ago, and we are now doing that as the FEMA application deadline approaches, and we're trying to get kind of these tips and tricks to community members about, well, this is actually how it works. You need to apply by the deadline, you can appeal, and then this is how it interacts with, the Small Business Administration, which has been a really big tripping point for people. So our 5-second overview is bringing that information down to a very simple, but making sure the information is there, a simple level, and then making sure it's linguistically and culturally accessible to people.
And you're working through the different nonprofits to actually access some of those resources from FEMA, right?
Yes. So we're
to support individuals and small businesses.
We're working with community-based organizations who are then talking to community members, and a lot of these CBOs work specifically with Spanish-speaking communities, or work specifically with Mandarin-speaking communities or Tagalog-speaking communities. And so they kind of know the way to frame it, but they do get kind of the messaging that we've created out there.
Got it. Thank you, Anna. And Marsha, how about you in terms of, the work that's been happening in Santa Clara? Because, as Nicole said, the fund is evergreen and it supports the 10-county Bay Area region, but we really want to focus in San Mateo and Santa Clara County. And we want to make sure that these two counties are the ones that are most responsive to the needs, because that's where we live and that's where we serve.
Right. Yeah. And good morning, everyone. This fund is a great idea. One of the things that I've noticed in my 40 years in emergency response and recovery is that the people that put their logos on news and television fastest get all the money, especially if they're recognized. And so nothing against the Red Cross, but they tend to get a lot of private donations because everybody knows who they are. But the fact is that their part of the response is very, very short-lived compared to what has to happen to take people from the moment of impact to developing themselves to a sense of normal again and rebuilding their lives. And so having this fund, I think, will help us to put the money in a place where it can be put in the hands of those that need to actually take this thing to the finish line. And I've been an emergency manager in Santa Clara County my whole career, a government emergency manager. And I was part of the board of CADRE for many years before I took over the role of executive director. But I know from the government perspective that there was no way I was ever going to be able to meet and know everything that the nonprofit and faith community was doing, all of that good work. And so that's why I got connected to CADRE, because it was important for me to know that I had a single point of contact to reach all those organizations. So now we, as the VOAD, which is part of a national network, we connect directly with the state voluntary agency liaisons, which connects to all of the different VOADs and COADs in the state, as well as FEMA's voluntary agency liaison, which connects to the national VOADs and the national partners that will come into a community and help. People like Team Rubicon that cleans up debris, and the Footprint Project that creates solar panels to make charging stations, and organizations that come in to set up networks for communication or to come in and help to rebuild. That network is huge. Now, the VOAD COAD model is not funded. We are a parallel emergency management structure to government, which is well funded. And so the government section coordinates the special districts and cities within their jurisdiction, and the VOAD or COAD manages the nonprofit, faith-based, and private sector as far as trying to make connections. And so that's what we do, is we try to make those connections. And what Anna said about the language, I mean, that's something that we're really trying to work on right now, is that the disparity in the amount of languages that are spoken in our community versus the amount of languages that are translated is leaving a whole lot of people to fend for themselves. They're the last to the table to know that resources are available, because they have to get it from word of mouth by someone that understood English or Spanish or Vietnamese, which are typically the languages. So that's a challenge. Now we have function teams, as Anna works with community organizations. We have function teams that represent the key players of access and functional needs: food, mass care and housing, emotional spiritual care, That's all I can think of off the top of my head, but they are networked. And so we network with them to be a voice for the disaster survivors.
And Marsha, you bring up a really good point, which I want to just kind of piggyback, because I don't want to lose it in terms of what you said, Anna and Adam, in terms of, you know, the work really, you know, sometimes it's we need to respond very quickly. And I think, Adam, you mentioned it, right? It was $50 million that it cost the county, right? We needed to respond immediately because we saw, you know, what's happening in the RV parks, what's happening even on the streets, right? Even though each city is responsible for their own storm drainage, the compounding of the issue is really important for the county to get involved. But Marsha and Anna, you also mentioned sort of this recovery, rebuilding, and sort of long-term resiliency, which is super important, right? Because we see a lot of communities, okay, you know, we got flooded, but in terms of repairs or, you know, buying new clothes or food, like you mentioned, Marsha, you know, for the long term, or even housing, right? It's just like you move from, you know, to a different place because it was, you know, it was flooded. Adam, I just want to ask you, so how did the county and how does the county think about these immediate responses, right? In terms of just housing and providing information. I know that you guys had the event center, but in terms of just communications, just give us a sense of what those immediate needs are and how you guys support them. And same question for you, Marsha and Anna, how you guys respond to that?
Yeah, in terms of the immediate needs for this particular set of storms, and I'll leave out the shooting and have, you know, we had some similar response mechanisms. Typically the counties would set up, you know, mass congregate shelters. In this particular incident, because we had about 160 people displaced, which was the most in California for a period of time. I'm not sure if it stayed that way, but we tried out a hotel model because we were able to secure enough hotels to get people into that sort of location, because we saw that these storms were continuing to pile up, and we had, you know, information from the national weather that it was going to be 2 weeks and you know, at least a week or 2 weeks, and we thought we had, you know, sufficient capability to manage the population that were being displaced in hotels. But it was a big endeavor because we had to, you know, obviously get contracts with hotels. We had to make sure there was space for them. We had to then bring 3 meals. We had to become culturally competent. We had to bring mental health services. And so we have some great departments in the county that work with people, our human services agency, our, you know, community folks who have a lot of languages that they can speak and communicate with and such. But that was just a big challenge. And as we're thinking about it, from the county's perspective, we're like, wow, this is kind of a micro event, right? This, although it was big and it took a lot of energy and effort and impacted individuals in a pretty massive way, compared to, you know, other disasters that we might encounter, it may be a micro event. And so that's why we're really trying to gather as much knowledge and preparation. Well, just squeeze as much out of this as we can in terms of lining up for the future instances. And the shooting was similar. The shootings were similar, where we had ultimately housed people in hotels, and many of them are through a partnership with Airbnb, being housed in an intermediate solution. And now we're starting to grapple with, you know, the long-term solution, not just for those folks who are particularly impacted, but for folks who we might soon discover are living in substandard conditions as we do additional outreach in those farms and communities. So those were many of the things that we brought to bear. But even though the county is a well-funded organization and well-staffed and whatnot, the recovery aspect that you're describing is taxing, right? And it's a long-term commitment. And you find people that aren't connected to the system, or who are may not be able to be connected to the system because they don't have appropriate status. And you feel, you know, moral responsibility to get them into potentially a better place than they were when you found them in the first place. And so that's where, you know, you need all your partners and whatnot.
And so, Adam, to that point, Anna and Marsha, you guys connect a network of nonprofits, right? In terms of what you said, sort of making sure that communications, you know, the different types of nonprofits are really connected to the community. But, you know, to the point that Adam made in terms of just this long-term need, you know, a little bit of what you said, mental health support perhaps, or maybe financial assistance and housing, employment. Can you just talk a little bit about how the network in both counties, in San Mateo and Santa Clara, kind of work towards that and sort of getting information, resources, maybe even planning workshops or anything like that that might, you know, support the communities? Marsha, you want to go?
Start this time? Yeah. Well, it's interesting, Adam, that you mentioned that this was a micro event. Now it is, and Santa Clara County, San Jose had a flood in 2017. That was a micro event too, 280 families. It took almost 3 years to get those families back in order. And that was with still connected to government, but primarily done by nonprofits, because it was helping them get cars because their cars had flooded out, or getting them trained in a new job, or finding better housing because there were 8 families in one room, and advocating because the apartment owners wanted to raise their rent by $500 all of a sudden. So these are little events, and we need each other. We all have to work together to do this. And for the most recent events, we have we're still learning that we need to do more coordination. We found out 3 weeks after the flood started that one of the cities was aware of a apartment complex that 4 units had flooded out. And because the apartment owner had put them in a hotel, the city didn't think that they needed anything else because they were housed. And so 3 weeks into it, we tracked them down and start realizing that they lost everything in the flood. They need furniture, they need beds, they need, one of the moms was driving her child to school because she was outside of the school bus area. And so she was having to miss work to do that. And then it turns out that there's a law that the school, regardless of where the child is supposed to come and pick them up when it's related to a disaster. So we're anticipating just for those families, and without any individual assistance, because Santa Clara County didn't get that presidential assignment to be able to do that. And so we didn't have any funding. The nonprofits didn't have any funding. One got funding from the community foundation, and they were able to help them with their rental assistance, because they some of them didn't want to go back to an apartment that had flooded now twice in 4 years. And so, but we have no housing here, so they're really working with them to find housing. Every disaster is different, and different things happen. When we have had a couple shootings in Santa Clara County in the last couple of years, we ended up mobilizing comfort dogs, which isn't something we do all the time, and realized that we should have also mobilized this volunteer team of massage folks that would come in and just provide, that relaxation, not to mention
mental health services,
huge mental health for ongoing.
Right.
And just kind of as we're monitoring what government is doing, just making sure that that we're advocating, because sometimes it happened here. There were contracts that were going to be entered into during COVID.
Right.
We reviewed the contracts because we, as emergency managers, we understand the documentation that's required, and knew that the money that was being contracted came from FEMA. And there was not clear outline in the contract on what documentation burden was going to be put on these nonprofits. And so we made sure that to make sure everyone was going to get what they needed. And I'll stop there because Anna, we do the same
Yeah.
things.
And Anna, just to give it a little bit of different spin too, and because of what just Marsha said, right? Thrive Alliance, Thrive Rise, which is actually the agency and the nonprofit, VOAD, which is the voluntary organization active in disaster, right? The nonprofits that come together. Is there an opportunity, because of what you said, right, Marsha, in terms of maybe massage or comfort dogs, mental health services obviously is much needed. Are there any opportunities for like volunteers to get involved in sort of this long-term recovery, not just the immediate response, Anna, with the nonprofits that you work with throughout the different sectors?
I think there's certainly opportunities for volunteering going forward. We're still at Thrive Rise. We're still figuring out what that infrastructure looks like. It can get complex with volunteer management and training and potential background checks, but we want to simplify that as much as possible, because when you need volunteers, you need it like yesterday, right? And there's not a lot of time to do that. But one thing I would say is thinking about the long-term recovery process. We're really talking about people who were not doing well to begin with. And when we think about disasters, we can't disconnect that from people's basic needs every day not getting met. So I would say the best way to engage with long-term recovery is engaging with those sectors that provide that social safety net to individuals who were hit hardest during the last event and are likely to get hit hardest at the next event. So, really specifically, we're talking about housing and food access and healthcare access, and those volunteering or supporting in any way those organizations that deal with making sure people are whole on a day-to-day basis and not experiencing what we might call an everyday disaster, right? That is one of the best things you can do to support long-term recovery. We do we are engaging in kind of trying to get people to access FEMA as a kind of a first line, but a lot of people are going to fall through the cracks there, and we know that, and that's unfortunate. So when we're talking about like what happens when FEMA kind of leaves, right? And we're left with a lot of people who are in a worse situation than they were before the storms hit. That's when we start talking about, let's go back to the basics here, and let's support our community-based organizations and our nonprofits that, allow people to not just survive at the margins, but oh, I don't want to use this pun. I was going to say thrive, allow people to thrive. But it's true.
Yeah, well, and I think the most basic. So, for example, we've gotten a few applications to the fund. One, for example, was for support, in terms of just immediate childcare, right? Because it was flooded, homes got flooded. Folks needed a place for the childcare, but the childcare organization was also having trouble with the building. So, the transportation, food is really important. I think, we got a request from several organizations seeking, food and just pantries, right, in order to support families that they're seeing. And Second Harvest Food Bank had a huge application to us, because it's compounded not only with the storm, but also with the end of some of the pandemic support for families in terms of just food security. Adam, looking beyond sort of, the immediate response, similar question from Marsha and Anna, and I'm going to ask, if there's any questions from the audience, to please put them on the chat. That would be great. Adam, just looking, beyond, how do we prepare? Obviously, we encourage folks to be part perhaps of the neighborhood emergency response teams, get involved and individually be prepared for an earthquake, which is probably what we've been talking for a long time. But, we saw the pandemic, we saw the floods, we saw the wildfires, and unfortunately, these shootings are just horrific. And I don't know if you can actually prepare for that, but just in terms of, how the county thinks about this in preparation.
Yeah, I'll just go into what you're talking about a little bit with the shootings, I've been thinking about that a little bit recently, and thinking about were we, sort of prepared to respond to something like those shootings, because it did happen in, Santa Clara County in various instances. And I started thinking, we should really turn our attention to that as a county, and as, to the extent we can influence volunteer organizations. We have kids, and I've been a part of this, putting together these protocols for the county, who are preparing for this in school. They have to go under their desks, and they have to prepare to lock the doors. We have little kids, right? So if we're sort of putting them through the emotional ringer there, and getting, teachers and folks prepared for these things, I feel like we can really do a lot ourselves to prepare. So that's just something I've been thinking about recently with the shootings, is that we really have to put together a comprehensive plan to how we're going to support people in the aftermath of these events. So I think we can do better there. But, in terms of preparations, I think this foundation and people just taking a step back and thinking about all the different ways we're going to need to support people when natural disasters occur, putting ourselves there, in our imaginations, and understanding all the different things that have to come together to support people is a big first step. And then, obviously there's individual planning the county needs to do, and individuals need to do to be prepared to respond to the emergency. But I think this is an effort at that level of let's put ourselves forward, since we're in an unrelenting set of storms that keep us in the mindset and emergencies. And so I don't know, that's what comes to mind. I don't have anything additional.
Yeah. And Anna and Marsha, same question. How are you guys thinking in terms of just preparation for, future emergencies?
You can go first, Anna.
I look at this with different time horizons. There's long-term planning, which is really big picture for me. That's how we can reduce impacts the best, where we're talking about social vulnerability reduction. So what I mentioned before about making sure people have their basic needs met on a day-to-day basis, and that they're doing well, so that they're more likely to be able to absorb a shock like an earthquake or like a flood, right? But then there's also our built environment, and there's a lot to be done there in terms of making our communities safer from natural hazards, right? So that's at the policy level, that's at your capital improvement level. That's going to take a long time though, right? That unfortunately, we're not going to see any drastic difference in either social vulnerability reduction or in a resilient environment next year, right? And so that's why on this shorter timeline, we do need to think about how are we getting people as safe as possible in the conditions they're already in. So we talk about emergency communications for one. Are we reaching everyone through community-based organizations? Are our communications in the right languages? Are they framed correctly? Are they framed in a way that will make people's behaviors change? And also, do they have a safe place to go? That is a really, really big issue right now, where when people don't feel safe in their homes, they also don't know where else they can go. During emergencies, cities or the county will set up evacuation points. The communications and the openings of these can be kind of a disjointed process because we're talking about different jurisdictions, and that's going to happen. But this is where I think the nonprofit and faith-based sectors they have a role to play in terms of opening up what we call resilience hubs, right? Safe locations that are familiar to community members, that are structurally safe during any type of event, right? And that people know they can go charge their phone, or where people know, it's surrounded by rain gardens to absorb floodwaters, right? And, that's not foolproof by any means, but having that network of safe spaces is really, really important to start developing now.
And Anna, is that something that you guys are working on with Thrive Rise?
Yeah, that is a big working item for us this year and next.
Because there's and before Marsha, you go, there's a question in the chat about, disaster recovery centers, and they're not necessarily accessible to folks on the coast. because, I guess that goes to, for example, the event center, right? Setting up something at the event center, which is in San Mateo, but folks on the coast, which are, impacted, can't actually get over the hill. So, how does the county respond? I know that, Half Moon Bay High has been, a place for, of a, semi-center, but Adam, any thoughts?
Yeah, we worked with FEMA to try to sort out what was the best way, FEMA and the state, the best way to reach as many people as possible for the disaster recovery. And FEMA deployed mobile units, but it was admittedly for a shorter period of time than the long-term stay that has been at the event center. So at 3 different locations across the coast side, we had mobile units for 2 to 3 days each. And we had some decent turnout to those. But yeah, that is something potentially in the future we could think about doing, is having a disaster recovery center that's more permanent on either side of the hills. And it's very resource intensive from FEMA's perspective and from these disaster recoveries in the states and everybody's. So there's, a whole, I think it's 5,000 square foot thing filled with 20, 30 tables and representatives from Department of Motor Vehicles, from FEMA, from SBA, from Thrive, from everywhere. So to sort of replicate that concurrently at 2 different locations was, I guess, just wasn't feasible necessarily. So we used the mobile units.
Okay. And so, Anna, just a quick bug then. I think that's something for sure that we need to work on, on the coast, right? Just continue to have not only the communication, but just those smaller, centers that I know have, are in place, right? Alas, in Half Moon Bay, and Puente and Pescadero also do some of that. But Marsha, how about in Santa Clara County? How do we best prepare for community?
How do we best prepare the community? I've been asking myself that question for 40 years, and I've tried a lot of different things. And we have, CADRE only became a nonprofit in 2019, and we hit COVID with no staff. And
Wow.
So it was volunteers. And then there was me as the executive director. Then there was a second person part-time as a bookkeeper. So we're still running on a shoestring. Community Foundation gave us $100,000 in 2020. We made that last a whole year, but our staff are retired. We don't have a building. They don't need benefits. So it's like we've done so much with so little. We should not be operating that way. We are an integral part of emergency management in the community, and in order to do the laundry list of things that we would like to do, and one that we're working on right now is that our emergency alert messages only go out in English. So we're having all kinds of conversations. We're going to convene a group of community stakeholders to talk about alert and warning, and what does it feel like when you don't get the message in your language, and how can we develop a real-time translation service so that messages can go out and people can respond and react quickly and not be left behind. We created an earthquake safety program that was translated into 17 languages to try to reach more of a community that has isolated itself from the government for the most part because they don't talk to them directly. And so we're trying to, put our hands out and say, we see you, we want you to be engaged. And this is all we could do at the moment, but we're trying. Developing the relationships with each of the nonprofits and faith organizations, and as much as we can, the private sector, on what do you want your disaster mission to be? What is it that you think is going to be your best use of your time and resources in a disaster, and how can we help you develop that? Or who can we connect you to so that you can grow that capability? And and then creating a much stronger long-term recovery group. So we automatically, when there's a disaster, convene everybody. We just say we're going to have a meeting, or we're going to have a Zoom. For COVID, we had a Zoom with 120 organizations on it, getting updates. And so it's whatever the disaster is, updates from the impacted local government, and then the impacts that the nonprofits and faith are seeing. And then we start filling in the gaps. So that always happens. But then the longer it goes on, resources start to fade, FEMA goes away. So then there's a long-term recovery group that has to be established with funding to continue to go from, the casework and the assessment of the individuals to personalized programs to help them get what they need to get back to normal, to rebuilding and construction, because there are a lot of organizations that will come in and donate time to do construction, but that all has to be tracked. We have purchased a software. We've been supporting Santa Cruz County for almost 2 years now with their fire and now flood response, where all of the casework and the construction can be tracked in one place. All that on our shoestring, but it's like, oh my goodness, how long are we going to be able to do this without help?
And it's much needed, right?
There's
Marsha,
so
I mean,
much,
you
so
know,
much we can do.
because we started talking about response, right? But for me, the constant drumbeat is the resiliency and sort of mitigation and continuing to think about this, because like you said, once the sunny skies come back, everything seems to be back in normal, but still displacement of families, in housing. Adam, you mentioned it, because of the shooting, some of the families actually had to move, from the coast over the hill, and probably housing them for over a year, right? Because they mental health services, services for the children, financial assistance, etc. So I think this is huge, just to think about sort of the future and preparedness. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, that you've touched on the things that we're thinking about is, and some of these folks were not, most of them were not connected to the county in any way or other services. Some of them may have been receiving some support from local nonprofits, but for the most part, they were not connected to the county, and we're now, looking to support them for an extended period of time until they can get into a better situation. Until we're not trying to put them back in that situation that they were in. That baseline is not acceptable, and we know we have long-term responsibility and commitments to things like mental health. Like, there were kids, who were around and impacted in this, and what does that mean for them? And so, and like I was saying, that just that small group that was there, and that we've been housing, it's a challenge, and there's a lot of resources that need to be devoted, and we'll see what is uncovered as we continue to explore the conditions at other farms locally. That may be an additional challenge coming our way.
And for folks, Marsha and Anna, that are interested in just learning more about, the alphabet soup, COAD, VOAD, volunteer organizations active in disaster, and collaborating organizations active in disaster, how do you contact your agencies? Just go to a website, phone, again, just going back to volunteering once, Marsha, you mentioned that you're doing a bunch of stuff on a shoestring, so I'm sure you might, not only volunteer during an emergency, but sort of building out the organization as well is something that's important for you guys. So how to connect with you guys?
Well, I mean, you can email me directly. It's marsha@cadresv.org, and we're looking for board members with more, strategic ideas about the growth and the resilience. We're looking for people that would like to help to develop these resilience hubs. We're looking for people to help facilitate the function groups because they would thrive, no pun intended. They would thrive if there was someone shepherding them. But when we leave it to them to keep their coordination going, when it's blue skies, you know, there are other conflicting demands. And so as we can help to kind of work through the emergency planning and just use their subject matter expertise to build those plans, then they can plug into them when it happens. But yeah, Marsha at CADRE.sv.org, and there are all kinds of opportunities. I'd be happy to talk to anyone that is interested.
And Marsha, there's a question in the chat about, you know, which disaster, I think you said it was the wildfires in Santa Cruz County, that you're still dealing with almost 3 years later. Can you just talk a little bit about why that is? And is that?
Yeah, so the San Jose flood, it took almost 3 years to get the last, it was a handful, 4 or 5 that just, they couldn't find a place to settle them. The wildfires in Santa Cruz, they're just now starting to do construction rebuilding for those that didn't have insurance, that the voluntary organizations have come in now to try to help, and they're looking for resources too. Affected families be help in the extent. Yeah, they're well, I mean, average time, we're talking about little events. Remember, Northridge earthquake, it was 20 years before they were before government closed out its final projects. And so I would tell you that the individuals are probably beyond 20 years, that they now are probably invited to the birthday parties of the case managers because their relationships have been going on so long. But
yeah, so smaller events usually have an average time of, you know, about 3-4 years at least, right? Yeah.
That earthquake, when it comes, we're
gonna be ready. All right. And Anna, how do we get in contact with you? How do we?
There's a lot of ways to plug in. I can also put my email in the chat. I'm always happy to connect individually, but we have monthly meetings last Wednesdays at 10 a.m. and I can make sure that that information goes out as well. We have training opportunities. It's a good way to just meet some of the organizations in the COAD. And then if you're on our mailing list, then you'll get all sorts of messages from me about opportunities. So that just getting on the mailing list is really great. And I can make sure that everyone has those details.
Thank you. Hey, I know we're closing in on time. I also wanted just to say thank you, Marsha, Anna, and Adam, for your information. I think it's, you know, we do this just to provide information, but at the same time, just to critically think about what's needed in the community, because this is, like you said, Marsha, they're small events that actually have ripples for many years, for many families, for many in our community. And sometimes we don't see them because the blue skies come. You know, folks are still in need. So I just want to thank you for all the work that you do, continue to do, and please reach out, you know, as we continue to develop and coordinate together. I'm going to pass it on to Nicole just to give us some closing comments.
Great. Thank you, Manuel. Thank you, Minnie. Really appreciate it. And I just cannot thank enough our panelists. The amount of work that you do and manage day to day, even when there isn't an emergency, and then managing that on top of when emergencies hit. Thank you so much, Marsha and Adam. I mean, it's really, I'm really glad that you are in our region and doing what you're doing. Really, thank you so much. And you know, recent disasters, as we've heard, have shown us the importance of having resources that we heard about today and having immediate relief and aid to those affected. And what, you know, Marsha, I was struck that everybody knows what the Red Cross is, because that's the first thing that people get, you know, they see on TV or they hear on the radio. We'd love to have our emergency and disaster relief fund be that prominent in our region. So when disaster strikes, people know, oh, the Community Foundation is going to get the money to where it's needed immediately, local for big disasters and these kind of smaller micro disasters that we've been hearing about. So for everybody on this call, for our donors and other funders who've made it to this call, please consider supporting this fund. As you've heard, it is really important. And when disaster strikes, it's urgent. And then the last piece that Marsha was talking about is just the length, and Anna too, the length of time it takes to get people back on their feet after a disaster, and to, as Adam was saying, to build the resiliency of our communities for the long term. The Relief Fund is really, that is why we created it, this Evergreen Fund. So our team is going to be sending out a follow-up email after this event for more information about how you can support it and to support the organizations you heard from today. So thank you all for attending and for your commitment to our communities, and special thanks to our panelists. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.